Pastor Zamo's stern demeanor at the pulpit reflected the import of his message on this Sabbath. It had been a typical service so far, with the tone-deaf worship team and Sister Verna speaking in tongues. My father had dozed off. I touched his shoulder so he wouldn't miss the action. He was Pastor Zamo's biggest fan and loved his sermon. Looking back, I shouldn't have done that. I should have let him sleep peacefully in the stifling heat and din. Pastor Zamo glared at us. God tell me that anybody who take that government vaccine is lost for all eternity, he thundered. He fixed his condemning eye on his flock, and we stared back, bemused. What he said here? Sister Verna asked me. Before I could answer, Pastor Zamo shouted again. Flecks of spit formed at the corners of his mouth. Mark of the beast, all you who take that government poison in your blood going to hell. And we all flinched at the high whine of feedback. Pastor Zamo returned to his red velvet covered throne, and the worship leader urged the congregation to our feet. Papa met, Sister Verna whispered in awe. Dad tapped my knee, and I instantly came to my attention and gave him my arm to lean on as we stood on our feet. We sang Goodbye World, followed by No Grave Can Keep My Body Down, and then it was time to leave. My sister Janice was in the kitchen drinking coffee. I glanced at the chicken in the sink, still uncooked and uncleaned. I sighed. Janice rubbed her temples. Wine is a mocker, Dad said, his voice booming. Janice groaned and frowned at him. He ignored her and hobbled away. Warehouse again? What time you get home? I asked as I rolled up my sleeves. I cut open the bag of chicken and began to strip the skin off it. Why are you so damn loud? She complained. You missed service again, I said. I'm not following white man religion, she said. I watched her as I went about my task. Janice used to be our church youth group leader. Then she went away to study and came back with dreadlocks, a nose ring, and tattoos. Good thing Mommy wasn't alive to see it. You missed some real action. Pastor Zamo said if you take the vaccine, you're going to hell, we? I rubbed the meat with salt and black pepper. Janice let out a protracted stoops. Zamzam do tired smoke with to write sermons, she snorted. She suddenly looked worried. Trev, you're going to get vaccinated, right? And Daddy too? She asked. I admit, Pastor Zamo's spittle spewing hyperbole had rattled me. I thought you said the government shouldn't mandate vaccinations. I kept my eyes on the onions as I chopped. I said people should have a choice, but it's just good sense to get that shot. Make sure that they get it too, okay? He high risk. Her tone brooked no argument. She left the kitchen, and soon I heard raised voices. I sighed. Weekends when Janice was home were always the hardest. I look forward to Mondays when she took off to her plot of land and Rastaman in Girardel. I stuck the chicken in the oven. It wouldn't be well seasoned, but Dad needed his meal times to be regular. I walked into the living room where Dad and Janice were arguing. Zamo believed God talking to him. He foo. Janice was so animated, her locks were shaking. Of course, God talked to him. Touch not the Lord's anointed. Dad leaned from his armchair and wagged his forefingers at her. Dad, if you catch the disease, you finish. Trevor, say something now. Janice entreated me. I gaped at her. In that moment, I was struck by how alike they were. We have the appointment for Wednesday, I said. Dad pushed out his lips, and my stomach knotted. I knew that look meant he was going to be stubborn. The next day, I listened to my co-workers discuss taking the juke. Most of them decided to wait for a particular brand of vaccine that reputedly had less side effects. However, at 11:30 a.m., we all received a corporate email saying we had to proof of vaccination by Friday. This was followed by a flurry of angry emails back and forth from enraged employees, and then another corporate email promising an education session. At 4 p.m., I went home and made pancakes with salami and cheese with 2 cups of Milo. Dad and I sat together as usual to have our light supper, and then I broached the subject. We have to leave home around 6:30 a.m. so we can get there early. I don't want to stand in the hot sun, okay? I tried to be casual. Dad worked the bread between his dentures. I'm not taking no devil poison. He was equally casual in his tone. How you mean, it's just medicine, like all the other shots you have to take, I replied. The list of terrifying side effects I'd read about flooded my mind. Pastor Zammer said that thing is the mark of the beast. I don't want it. Dad blew on his Milo to cool it. I bit my lip. Pastor Zammer said the disease is not real too. Remember back in January? And then his brother gets it? I kept my tone low. It's not his fault God didn't reveal it to him before. The time of revelation hadn't come yet, he replied. He was now quoting Pastor Zamor word for word. But if the vaccine is the mark of the beast, how come it's only Pastor Zamor saying so? What about Sister Verna? She not a prophet too? And how comes vaccine not mentioned in the book of Revelations? I was throwing everything I could think of into the argument. You are an unbeliever, like Janice too? He snapped. God gives doctors knowledge, right? The same way they can treat your kidneys is the same way they can help you not catch the disease, I reasoned. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on his face. He stopped chewing for a moment and stared down at the table. Trevor, more important than life is salvation. When your mommy died, his voice faltered, and then he caught himself. When your mommy died, it's Pastor Zamo that come and pray with me and remind me that he is in my future, not my past. I want to go to God. I want to see her again. He stared into my eyes, and I saw the deep carved wrinkles in his face. I called Janice after Dad went to bed. It didn't go well. So you're going to let him give up on life and die in suffering? You mad? Janice's voice rose to a screech. I pulled the phone to a safer distance from my ears. It's his choice, Janice. I cannot force him. After all, I protested. Look, when he tell me Zamzam said the disease is hoax, is one thing. When Zamzam full up the church with people during lockdown, I still don't say nothing. When Dad say wearing the mask was choking him, I don't make no noise. But Trevor, this is to save his life, and I am not staying quiet on that one. He then informed me she would drive us to the health center herself and hung up. I closed my eyes as a wave of weariness swept over me. I hadn't been feeling well for a few days, and I could feel a sore throat coming on. I took a mix of honey, lime, and rum and went to bed. That night, I dreamt Pastor Zamo set my bed on fire with a lit match. Try as I might, I could not escape. On Tuesday morning, I skimmed through the daily health assessment form and hesitated when I came to the symptoms of sore throat or cough. If I tick yes, my supervisor might insist I lose a day's pay. I finished the form as negative on all the symptoms. On Wednesday morning, Janice drove us to the health center. As they promised, senior and vulnerable at-risk people were first, and Dad was quickly moved up the line. The nurse at the desk took my information and then began working on Dad's form. He leaned forward and placed his palm flat on the form, preventing her from writing. I don't want the juke, he said with firm conviction. Janice exploded. While she yelled at him, I held his hand. The nurse excused herself to consult with her peers, and my eyes fell on the list of people that had already been vaccinated that morning ahead of our arrival. I felt my eyes widen. I took out my cell phone. Janice meanwhile engaged in some colorful profanity, what I knew we had lost. The nurse returned. Sir, if he doesn't consent, there's nothing we can do. Will you be getting vaccinated? She directed this question to me. I rolled up my sleeves and nodded. We drove home in stony silence. Janice dropped us and took off. I made breakfast for Dad, then dashed to work. That night, Dad began to cough. In the morning, he had trouble breathing, and by midday, I drove him to the hospital. In the evening, they allowed Janice and I into the ICU, where we got to see him one last time. His loud wheezing sounded impossible coming from someone so frail. "I'm going to sue that bastard if Daddy die. I'm suing him." Janice's voice rose. Dad opened his eyes briefly, and we heard him whisper with great effort, "Touch not the Lord's anointed." I thought of my cold and my sore throat. I couldn't be responsible, could I? Dad passed away that night. Janice was true to her word and tried to get an injunction filed against Pastor Zamo, but nothing came of it. She returned to Girardel, embittered. I attended church a week after Dad's funeral. I sat in my seat in the first row. Sister Verna was at the altar decreeing and declaring, while the worship team sang at the top of their lungs. Pastor Zama was in the little room next to the stage doing pre-service prayer with his team, as was the custom. Sister Verna plunked herself in the seat on my left and fanned herself. I reached into my pocket and took out my cell phone and scrolled through my photo gallery. I turned and showed her the screenshot I had taken at the health center. The photo was the list of the vaccinated. Pastor Zacharias Zamo's name was number 1 on that list. Her jaw dropped, her brow knit, and her nostril flared. She grabbed the phone out of my hand and ran up to the altar and tugged on the sleeve of the worship leader. I watched as my phone was eagerly passed around the team, then onto the front row in the congregation. I retrieved my phone at that point as the word of mouth spread. I went outside the tent, crossed the road, and sat down on the concrete step of somebody's house and watched. The first person to leave was Sister Verna, followed by the entire worship team. A slow trickle of people began to exit. By the time Pastor Zama walked onto the stage, his church was empty. I stood up, dusted the seat of my pants, and went home humming, "The world is not my home."
Well, yes, Lord.